resilience. This interview is devoted to a very topical and very complex and complicated, nevertheless very important subject, resilience. And we will discuss it together with my colleague Vitālijs Rakstiņš, Head of Crisis Management Department from Latvian Ministry of Defense, and myself. My name is Ieva Bērziņa and I'm Senior Researcher from Latvian National Defense Academy. So Vitālijs, let's start with really trying to understand what is this concept, because we indeed use this term so often in so different contexts, but what it exactly means, what is resilience?
Yeah. So, good question, and as it is with many modern concepts, so at the moment it's buzzword, because everyone uses wording resilience, starting from the NATO, European Union with a new strategic compass concept. It's also different nations drafting the resilience concept or strategies, and of course it's sometimes it's a mess with different definitions, but more or less majority of them has three main points. So it's resilience, it is ability to prepare and prevent some activities. It is ability to mitigate and to adapt to crisis and to continue to operate during some emergency situation. And of course, it's ability to transform and recover after. And in different wordings, more or less, this is the main purpose. So it is ability to be very flexible, to agile to any type of situation, and to be able to operate during this, not recover after only, but also operate during any emergency situation, starting from national disaster, technological disaster, or some kind of hybrid warfare, etc. Of course, our main interest is the new risks, new threats like gray zone warfare, hybrid warfare, and military threats. But of course, the majority of nations look at resilience from this perspective of to be ready to all hazards. Mainly it's natural disasters, terroristic attacks, technological disasters. You know, in our case, we are looking a little bit broader, but as many nations, as many concepts. So,
what determines that the concept of resilience comes into forefront of security discourse at this moment? What are main factors that determines, that we are speaking about resilience and that it is one of the number one concepts within security debates and documents, etc., etc.?
I think all these recent disasters or recent problems with security of supply, especially during the COVID, but we also see that this problem with Suez Canal or Guangzhou seaport blockade. So it has great impact on security supply, and we, all of us, feel it when you're going to a grocery shop and trying to buy something that the price is higher. And so the modern, as there is modern threats and modern hybrid warfare activities ongoing, which also many of which are not so visible, but we start to understand that you need to be ready for any type of disasters, any type of activities, which many of them which you cannot predict in peacetime. Usually this risk appetite is very focused on some particular disasters. For instance, in Latvia we have 35 defined disasters and catastrophes which we are ready to prepare. But we see that there is a lot of other actions, starting from the solar weather, ending with some gray zone warfare activities. That's why we need to be prepared to any type of crisis. And of course, each organization and each nation look at it from their perspective. For instance, NATO, they're focusing on so-called 7 baseline requirements on resilience. It's mainly activities necessary to support incoming force, host nation support for incoming force coming to member state. It's starting the continuity of government, the resilient communications, resilient energy supply, etc., etc. European Union is looking much more from the economic perspective. So it's security of supply, it's foreign direct investment screening, It's also activities related to this critical raw materials and different resilient projects, as it will be mentioned in the strategic compass. But of course, it's all what we witnessed, starting with the 5G toolbox problematic, ending with different regulations and directives with the title, for instance, resilience of critical activities. So resilience wording is also used in the titling of the documents, many of them. Of course, it's OECD and many other organizations, they also mention the resilience, but from different angle, like enablers of economic growth. But of course, when you're talking about the member states, NATO, European Union, or other nations, so of course they're also looking at resilience, but main issue is after when this COVID pandemics will end, hopefully, that many nations will start to review their security systems, and of course all these findings and lessons learned from the COVID and many disasters ongoing in parallel, like we see in Germany, in the Central Europe, with floods and other natural disasters. You need to change your system, how you address all this crisis, but it starts with this. You need to start to change the risk assessment, change the methodology of risk assessment, expand it to all hazard approach or whole threat approach. You need also to involve private sector in this risk assessment because state government institutions not always are able to understand all these risks and problematics. And of course, the main problem which will arise, it will be the investment, because one, if you have this planning capabilities, you have joint plans, you have some kind of exercise, but resilience, it's about investing in people. You need to train the personnel, investing in some kind of infrastructure to make it much more resilient against different activities. Invest in this, cyber resilience, cyber hygiene. So it all will cost, and of course it could be one of the main problems, because when we're talking about the private sector, there is the modern concept of just-in-time business model. So majority of entrepreneurs, they're fully dependent on logistics, so because it's much more profitable. But the recent problems with the security of supply shows that we are facing new problems, and it's a new normal. So it was not some kind of because of the beginning of COVID, because of some events or because of Suez Canal. It's a new normal. The security of supply will be interrupted. So you need to change your business model. What does it mean? So the entrepreneurs also need to store much more goods in the warehouses. They need warehouses because many of them don't have. You need to review your supply chain. Who is your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers? And of course, it will cost them, and the governments or institutions need to find some compensation, how to compensate all these investments, because to introduce so-called just-in-case business model, it's a new concept, just-in-case community, just-in-case business model, but it's fully dependent also on, you need to store something, you need to extra resources, which is not profitable.
You spoke a lot about NATO's 7 baseline requirements and other strategic documents that are being prepared at the EU level and also at a country level, and also you spoke about the need to change risk assessment methods. Can we translate it in the language for everyday citizen? I mean, when those documents will be defined, worked out, and hopefully implemented, what changes everyday citizen, everyday inhabitant will feel after we will have in the NATO and EU countries this concept of resilience being implemented? What will change? How everyday citizen will feel it?
Yeah. I think your question is overtaken by events, because many nations had this different risk management system, many had these risk registers, etc. But what COVID crisis showed, especially the pandemic with a long-lasting pandemic, is that you need to change behavior of ordinary people, because every one of us now is risk manager, because you need to assess risks. How I will go, for instance, for this interview, we all use public transport, we all use my car or in different ways. So risk assessment ordinary level, because everyone now is under the risks, and state cannot support you with some kind of general guidelines or heat map. So everyone is now a risk manager. You need to evaluate your risks. You need to understand, is it good for you? Are you ready to take this risk? Are you ready to risk? And of course, it's also going to private sector, because we see that entrepreneurs were fully involved in the COVID, because they are organizing their work, they are organizing their facilities to implement all these epidemiological requirements. So we see this focus of changing how we cooperate with private sector. So the private sector is part of national security, national resilience system. And but to answer your question in general, definitely we will see many changes. We will see that there are a lot of directives on regulation from European Union side, that also NATO is facilitating to involve private sector to enhance the societal resilience, like it was stated in the recent summit. But I don't think that this concept will be the same for a few years, because it will be rebranded or new issues will come. But anyway, so we need to change this the system, and the main challenge is that you need to involve the private sector. Mm-hmm. It's a full game changer. Not to involve in executing, for instance, these epidemiological requirements, but also in the risk assessment, in planning, in joint training.
So to put it in other words, so crisis management is a shared responsibility, beginning from government, continuing with non-governmental organizations, commercial organizations, security organizations, and each and every individual at the individual level. Did I got right your idea?
Yeah, so in general, yes.
Mm-hmm, okay. And if we take it as an ideal model, if we imagine like really maximum resilient society, how would you estimate Latvian society? What resilience grade would you give to Latvian society, let's say in a scale from 1 to 10?
It's a very, very tricky question, but I think what we have witnessed at the beginning of COVID crisis, that maybe we were not very ready, because we didn't have such reserves like other nations with all these masks and respirators. But as I mentioned in the definition, so resilience, it's not only the ability to prepare, but also ability to change and the ability to adjust the situation. And what I see is that we are learning fast. That there are a lot of good ideas, good actions were taken. So yeah, I think we 6 or 7, because I think no one is fully ready, and also these nations which we think that reference group, like for instance Finland, which had the big agency of all these material reserves like NESA. Even they were not ready for such a pandemic. So that's why a lot of good ideas, a lot of findings during the crisis, what we need not to lose them. So we need to fix them and to improve our system, because it's main task to improve system, because next crisis will be different, but you need to improve. Even if we are lucky, for instance, like after the first wave, we were lucky, but we need to improve something. We need to create reserves. Like one of the lessons learned, for instance, we need this civil reserves, I mean in manpower, because we don't have such like civil defense units or voluntary units or other voluntary groups. They were involved on ad hoc basis. That's why army was usually involved, like National Guard, to support civil defense activities, to support logistics, to support all this vaccination process. It's because we don't have other reserves like army. But in case if it's paramilitary activities going on the border, so we need the army to be deployed abroad. So that's why we need this changes concept, that we need also plan B for people, for civil sector, to be able to replace National Guard in providing all this support. So it's a very broad concept. And one of the main issues is, of course, this standards, because we have this kind of international standardization organization, ISO standards on cybersecurity, on some business continuity, but there is no standards for hybrid warfare. There is no standards for what to do with climate change, with different activities. That's why we need to change also the system, how we train and prepare people. And the only way I see it is to be ready for all type of hazards. So at least, because majority of consequences of all hazards, of all disasters, about 70-80%, the consequences will be the same. No electricity, no water, no supply. If you're ready to address them, then we will be much more survivable in the next crisis. So the total focus of change that you need to be ready to any type of crisis, and of course to military one. But
okay, I see. Yeah, so we are not perfect, but we are learning fast and we are developing, I guess. So, yeah. But let's say if one wants to assess the level of resilience in any country, what would be like top 3 aspects that you should look at to assess if the society, either it is resilient or not?
Yeah, I think a good example, Nordic nations, even they have this different success with the COVID, but the main focus is focus on essential services that should be provided during the crisis, so focus on these critical services, and of course the involvement of private sector, involvement of NGOs, and especially I think this Finland is a very good example because they have this very strong NGO community. And each citizen spends, I think, 70 hours per month for voluntary work. So it's like space for us for a moment. So you need to involve whole society. So you need this, and it to be structured, not on ad hoc basis, but to structure, because you need also legislation how to support all these spontaneous volunteers who are coming to support. You need also some guarantees for them in it, maybe if something happens. And the second, of course, you need this focus on essential services, that with the perception that if they will be operating, that also private sector will survive. So if there will be electricity, energy, communications, banking sector, that majority of small, medium entrepreneurs, they will be able to operate following. So the focus on that one, that's why. And of course, yeah, this command control, so how the government take decisions, what structures they have. So I think the main focus is to be able to understand your mistakes and change the system rapidly. So to be flexible on the decision making. But I think that nowadays, if we compare the beginning of COVID and what's going now, we see that even the small percentage of all this of the statistics, nations are immediately introducing much more restrictive measures than during when the COVID pandemic was on the top. So also the member states and governments, they're becoming much more agile, much more robust to the crisis.
Mm-hmm. And finally, taking into consideration your really huge and rich experience in this field of resilience, how would you say what overall, not only in Latvia but generally, if we look at the Western countries, what are the main obstacles in the way to more resilient societies? What is your impression and your conclusion?
Yeah. As I mentioned, that resources is and will be one of the main obstacles, because you need it's maybe not very sexy, but you need to invest in daily business. For instance, invest in cyber hygiene, invest in your cognitive resilience to start to behave different, invest in some minimal security or safety requirements. So not everyone has this minimum, also these financial resources to be able to survive during crisis. So it impacts our everyday life. So resources will be one of the main problems. The second problem, of course, is who is responsible, because there is no one ministry who is responsible for all resilience issues. So there was also discussion at the NATO to organize, for instance, meetings of resilience ministers, but who is it minister? Because in different nations it's different agencies responsible, and in the end of the day it is the prime ministers who should participate, because they are responsible for all sectors. So this sectoral perception, who is responsible for what, Yes, and of course this involvement of private sector, sometimes it's very formal or maybe some agencies, they do not understand the full benefits of involvement in private sector. Of course it's hard, it's a lot of discussions, a lot of you have to invest a lot of time, but at the end of the day you bring them on the board, so you have also the expertise, and they will be much more positive to decision taken by the government. As you see at the one moment our government didn't involve the private sector, so it was some bad experience, but at the end of the day, so all the social partners, NGOs, they participate in the government meetings. They're hard meetings, but at the end of the day, so decision is common. So that's why they're much more easier for them to execute all these decisions.
Okay, I see. So to conclude and to sum up what we talked, so resilience is very broad concept. It is still in the process of being developed, how it is defined, but at the end of the day, it requires certain practical steps like investment of resources, clear management structure, and also involvement of private sector, to mention some of the steps, but definitely this list is not exhaustive, of course. So let's hope that governments and organizations hear us, and let's hope that really our society in our country and in Europe becomes really resilient, because as the pandemic shows, it is extremely important.
Yes, and then what I didn't mention also, we're talking about this resilience of the essential services of our private sector, but of course one of the main concerns is also resilience of people, so societal resilience or cognitive resilience against disinformation.
And this is absolutely agree, especially in the pandemic. So this is like the fourth very important point.
Yeah, and to change it, you need to invest, so you need to educate people.
And again, it requires investment in education, media literacy, understanding. Fantastic. Thank you, Vitālijs, for a very informative talk, and I hope that really we made this concept more understandable for our audiences. Thank you so much.
Thank you.